Rosemary has always enjoyed writing, even though she spent several years ignoring that fact. Recently, with the help of an Eastline Books writing class, she has begun again to put her thoughts on paper. Her essays have been published by the Albany Times-Union and have been recorded on WAMC Northeast Public Radio. Please welcome Rosemary.
Skinny dipping. Is it a rite of passage or a sinful indulgence? I do not recall skinny dipping as a toddler. However, once, as my mother tried to get my sisters and me into the tub, Robin escaped. She flew through the front door just out of my mother's reach and ran down the street buck naked. Although this was not skinny dipping, seeing her run free with nothing between her and the wind looked enticing and became ingrained in my mind. My first encounter with swimming in the Buff took place at my older sister's house in Fort Walton Beach, Florida. Renelle is 12 years older than me. From our home in Wabash, Indiana, it was a short 10-hour drive down Interstate 65, through Kentucky, Tennessee, then Alabama, and on to her home in the Florida Panhandle. My family often visited. Renelle had built a pool in her backyard with a tall fence, many shrubs, and thick, bushy plants. It felt very secluded. Once, she entertained us with stories about how she and her husband, after a night out, would skinny dip. It sounded thrilling and somewhat exhilarating to be naked in a pool after dark. On an evening when the adults went out for dinner, the younger set decided to order in pizza. We finished and then stared at the pool. Did we dare? What if a neighbor heard? Or worse yet, what if the adults came home? As dark crept in around us and no lights emitted from the pool or the house, the thought kept pushing itself to the front of my brain. Do it! And so I did. I went inside, took off my bathing suit, wrapped myself in a towel, and came back out. My sisters looked at me suspiciously as I slid down the stairs into the water and left the towel resting on the cement sidewalk around the pool. A gasp went up amongst my siblings, then giggles. Soon, we were all in the water, glancing up in anticipation of the adults' return and laughing nervously. The water felt warm from the sun and wrapped itself around our bodies with its silkiness. We swam for a long while and eventually became waterlogged. It was time to get out. The four of us hid our smiles when we saw our stark white butts and the bikini tan lines rise out of the water into the still, humid night air of Florida. We made our way into the house, getting goose pimples as we were met at the door with the brisk air from the conditioner, and put on our pajamas. Later, when the adults came home, they inquired, "So, what did you do tonight?" "Oh, nothing much, just watch TV." But smirks crossed our faces as we glanced at each other when they left the room, our great secret. Some years later, one of my sisters in crime had a not-so-secretive skinny dipping episode. She was sunbathing at a muddy pond in the middle of a desolate cornfield, or so she thought. She and her friends had stripped themselves of their bathing suits and were floating on inflatable rafts. Suddenly, the air above them began to fill with private planes. The local airport was giving out free rides. They scrambled to the shore and fled into the corn rows, but not before getting noticed. Later, my father wanted to know if she was with the group of girls out sunbathing in the pond near the cornfield. Rhonda's blushing face answered it all. Much later in my life, my husband and I and our 2 daughters were camping with another family. It was an unusually hot, humid night for upstate New York, so warm in fact that we did not build a campfire. The 4 adults sat in the darkness, having put the kids to bed hours before. I could feel the sweat dripping down between my breasts. The thought of crawling into a hot, stifling tent made me cringe. I listened to the cool waters of Lake George slowly hitting our boat and the shoreline. It called me with every slap of a wave. Suddenly, I knew what I was going to do, what I had to do. I stood up and announced, "I'm going skinny dipping." There was a moment of stunned silence from my friends and husband. But I ignored their hesitation, turned and headed down the trail to the boat dock. I heard rustling and grumbling. Soon, I realized they were right behind me. It was a very dark night, not a star in the sky, the moon was absent. The moisture in the air was hanging so thick it was almost as if you could reach out and grab it. I stood behind a tree, disrobed, and slid into the water. Oh my God, this feels so good. I moved effortlessly through the quiet water like a trout just skimming under the surface. I felt my body temperature begin to drop. The others followed my idea, and soon I could hear their sighs of relief. We all swam in our own space, not bothering the others. After our cooling swim, it became apparent that getting out of the lake would be more difficult than getting in. We had slipped into the lake across mossy green rocks. To get out of the lake, we would have to crawl across those rocks on hands and knees. Somehow, the thought of my Irish, never seen by the sun, white ass shining as bright as if it were the moon did not appeal to me, and I'm sure my cohorts felt the same way. So one by one, and with as much dignity as can be mustered in such a situation, the four of us all had to climb up the boat ladder, scurry across the dock, and find our clothing lying on shore. We tried to remain quiet, like the muggy night, but as each person heaved themselves onto the boat and made a run for the trees, it became funny. I'm sure many other campers knew exactly what was going on as our hilarity carried across the calm water. Years later, I was on a girls' weekend with some friends and our daughters. Our friendship had been established on ski slopes with very little showing except your nose and mouth. However, on this weekend, we met in the middle of July at Sacandaga Lake. It felt strange to see each other in shorts with all that skin showing. That thought led Jan to tell us that her mother-in-law frequently skinny dips on warm nights. Our daughters, being about 12, seemed intrigued. As open-minded parents, we encouraged them to go down to the lake and take a dip. They all stood and then went into the bedroom and put on their bathing suits. "What are you doing?" "Well, we can't just walk down there naked." "So, wrap a towel around you." "Mother," was said in unison. Soon we heard them giggling and having fun. That is when it occurred to my friends and me, why aren't we down there? Why should they have all the fun? We decided that perhaps we should call it chunky dunking, and we took our motherly bodies down to the water's edge. We were much less reserved than our beautiful daughters. Perhaps it was the wine we drank, or the modesty you lose once you have gone through childbirth. But we began to strip on the dock where we stood. Our daughters had taken a much more unassuming approach. They had jumped into the water and then taken off their suits and put them back on the dock. "Oh my God, Mom, what are you doing?" "Going skinny dipping." "Mom, you're standing on the dock." "So, it's dark." By now, we were starting to chuckle at our daughter's horror, and with each plea to stop, we guffawed even harder. Finally, with the last plea, "Oh my God, Mom, just get in the water," our knees crumbled with hysterics. Fran dove in with her glasses on. I jumped with a big splash, and Jan slid down the ladder. We were laughing so hard it was difficult to keep from drowning. The next morning, the girls had to go diving for Fran's glasses. Skinny dipping, it does have its pleasures.